Welcome everyone, 56th webinar. Wow, getting old. Nice to be here today. I'm here with Cruce Saunders. Cruce, are you here and available?
I'm here as well. Hi, Byron.
Nice to have you here, Cruce. To give everybody a little footnote on today's fabulous presentation, I've been chatting with Cruce and had a really good opportunity to get to know him as part of a conference I'm hosting called Content Marketing Conference up in Vegas in May, so stay tuned for some more announcement on that. But it's been a real pleasure to get inside the mind of Cruce, who I think is on to some really exciting things that are going to help everyone today better understand really the engineering, the methods behind the madness of content marketing and content strategy. So a couple things to just go over with you real quick. Number one, please ask questions today throughout the presentation. Use your widget on the right side of your screen to fire any questions to me. I'll be keeping track of all of them and monitoring them, and we'll ask any questions for you, and the priority after after Cruce finishes his presentation. So have at that. I also popped up a poll, which I think would be lovely if you could fill out. Hopefully you can find that. There's a few questions in there that we'd love to get a feel for, particularly because it's just good data, and I'll reveal the answers to those polls if you don't see them at the end of the presentation as well. There's cool stuff in there. And this webinar will be recorded, always a question that we get, and everyone listening in, including even anybody that has registered for this webinar, will get a link to the recording so you can hear it again. Thanks for tuning it in. Feel free to share it. Fantastic. So in general, real quick, I'm going to go through a deck that talks a little bit about a setup for this presentation and the complexities of content marketing, and I think Cruce will have some really good answers for us on how this complexity can be minimized and maximized from an engineering perspective, so that'll be fun. Cruce is then going to go through about 20 slides, and which will end with a fabulous sort of a story, if you will, that he's going to share with us. And I'm going to ask a few questions after those 20 slides, and then he's got another 20 slides that he's going to send us off with so we can all become content engineering masters by the end of his presentation. So that'll be exciting and fun. So without further ado, let's dive in and hopefully surface with some great information today. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. So there's some content information for us, and again, these decks will also be available as well as the actual recording of the presentation, and you'll find links to those. You'll get an email probably in a few hours, knowing Glenn, that will be right out there. So I think by now we have a pretty good feel that to be successful, I like saying that forward-thinking companies are starting to think like old-school publishers, namely gathering ideas and developing stories and publishing a steady stream of content that engages readers and keeps them coming back for more. And I really think that's what's happening out there. I think it's we can get into the semantics of what we call all of this, and there's been wonderful debates about that, content strategy versus content planning, which I think is quite fascinating. From being in this industry for 15 years, I really don't see the distinction between those two camps, but maybe someone will enlighten me someday. But really, the question is, how do we make this transition? How do we start publishing good content? What does the content marketing workflow look like, and how do we win at it? Who are the players, and what are their roles? And can I do this as a small one-up marketing department, or do I need a small army of people to make content marketing work? And most importantly, where probably most of the pressure is on all of our shoulders, is how do we get the ROI we demand from this content marketing investment? So those are clearly the challenges. So, as it turns out, content marketing really is a fairly complex workflow, probably because we've made it so, I might add. I used to think that content marketing is easy. You just bang out some content, see what people's reactions are. If they like it and they pass it around, then do more of that. And if they don't, then you might try new things and try to be more original, more creative, more interesting. So I wish it were that simple, although in my mind I still do think about it being that simple. But I think in the end of the day, it does involve some advanced methodology and certainly some robust technology that can really shortcut the whole process. So I've got a nice simple deck here. It's going to kind of walk you through these big 5 ingredients I like saying, and those are content planning, creation, optimization, distribution, and performance measurement. And some of the elements that I'm seeing at least now with what these 5 pieces of the puzzle are trying to do, so we can all get on the same page and really set up Cruce to come in and kind of straighten this out with how this all fits together. So on the planning end of things, we really are trying to figure, and by the way, before starting Writer Access, I ran a full-service content marketing agency where we were challenged in a big way. Companies like the Walmart, the Company Store, Brookstone, FTD on the B2C side, on the B2B side, Iron Mountain, Salesforce, they wanted us to always begin, and we really insisted upon beginning with a content plan. I was out at one of our customers' offices in Baltimore. I brought one of our 400-hour plans with me, and they were just mesmerized, like, I need a copy of that. Like, 400 hours, what could one do with 400 hours worth of research in defining, what does that accomplish? And essentially content plans at the time we were building them, we're trying to figure out how much content do we need, how good does it need to be, what channels do we need to publish it in, how do we stack up with our competition, and more importantly, what specifically can we expect for the return on our investment. And so these plans, some of them 80 pages, 150 pages, would map that out and literally look at capturing market share in different silos and recommendations on how many assets we needed to create in each of those silos to capture the market share that would generate the leads and therefore the revenue. I mean, planning was a big part of what we did, and I think that's even, keep in mind that was 2005 to 2010 before anybody really knew what a content marketing agency was. But net, it was good stuff. And of course, fast forward now, we have incredible tools and technology that can help us get this stuff done and help us research things much faster and easier. And I think that 400 hours is now down to probably 40 or 80 hours maybe to really accomplish some of the same things we did back in those days. Content creation continues to be the big challenge, right? So there's wonderful chatter about how there's too much content out there and there's not enough original content, and that we're just producing stuff for the sake of stuff. I don't really buy the argument. I love when people sort of start poo-pooing all this content. Like, well, what are they creating that's so amazing? Are they just criticizing what's out there? But look, creating content is challenging. It's difficult, but it's also changed quite a bit. I think we're diving, finally, I think writers have a voice in the matter, no pun intended. We're learning that we need to create content with certain tones and styles that reflect our brand and who we want to be and the voice we want to have in the marketplace. We can now onboard writers to what those goals are with our tone and our style and our voice. We're getting much better at that, particularly in platforms like ours. And so, but where do I find good writers? And how do I know what to create? What really engages my readers? Those are challenges, and we're learning more about that as we begin studying what does get passed around and what channels might be best for us. But it's still tricky. It's still tough, and there's tons of tools and technologies out there that you can take a look at as well. Optimizing content. So I like saying that, don't think this is revolutionary, but I think that optimization is the new search engine optimization. And when we think about optimization, it's just a lot more than peppering keywords and content. It has to do with landing page optimization and of course, I would say search engine is optimization. Optimizing for the search engines is perhaps relevant, but I think there's new ways to do that. It's new ways to move the spider bots around the content on your website. Use things like frequently asked questions to link over to your blog posts, which help the search engines understand that your blog post answers a certain question. So I think we're just getting deeper now with our understanding of optimization and how to win both even off the page, not to mention on page. and who do we have do all of this? Who are the professionals that are handling our optimization? I think their skill set is getting wider and is no longer focused with just search engine optimization. So that's my point there on that whole area. Lots of great tools and technologies. So distribution continues to be the challenge for us all. I just saw a demo yesterday. Here's a little secret for any of you out there looking for some creative, distribution channels. I think LinkedIn is finally doing a really good job in making some smart moves with what they call content, sponsor content. And that's content that's fed out through the news feeds on LinkedIn, but is in fact sponsored content, where they're governing that, wanting you to only promote informational content to the crowd, to the audience. But you can get very granular with who you're promoting that asset to, and LinkedIn has a wonderful ability, probably more than any database and archive of leads, to really zero you in on getting your rich content in front of the right people. So check that out. I was quizzing them yesterday. There's only like 30,000 people that are using that channel right now. I think it's exciting. So get in there while you can and get your great content in front of people, and it's not crazy dollars to make that work. Unlike PPC rates and some of the other things we're seeing that are so competitive now, it's tough to get out there. But distribution is tough. I think Outbrain and other, there's great ways to continue getting your content out there, but we need more of them, and we need to reach people that are orbiting at high speeds. So performance. The pressure is really on us here, as I've mentioned, but really the challenges are immense for performance, so immense that it's really, how are we going to track all this stuff? What channels are my customers in? And actually this is the wrong slide up here. I'll fix this before I launch it up. But there are incredible new technologies, and technology, of course, is really where it's at when it comes to content performance. So the question that we have for Cruce today is, so first of all, what is content engineering? We need to understand that in this whole workflow. And what is the methodology and the technology that engineers, if there is such a thing, are using? So let me, without further ado, quickly turn things over to Cruce and take it away. Hang on one second, and I'm going to find you right here.
All right.
Hang on one second. Go ahead, Cruce. Fire away, and you'll have your screen in about 10 seconds. There you go.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Byron. I appreciate the that good overview of the market and what's happening right now with content marketers being besieged on many fronts with many technologies for each phase of the life cycle, the publishing life cycle. There's a lot of technology involved in the delivery of what is a very, very simple proposition, which is telling good stories and getting those stories out to an audience and involving them with our brands and with our messages.
Cruce, 2 seconds. Can you make sure your screen's turned on? You should have an accept little thing there. Make sure you clicked on that.
Yeah, I got that. Let's see if that came through. Are you able to now see a
yes,
slide?
Perfect. Yep, we just are chiming in right now. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So that landscape that Byron introduced us to is getting more complicated all the time. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's worth taking a look at the Chief MarTech content technology landscape for 2015. That is even an even broader exposition of all the various content-related technologies, as well as e-commerce and other marketing channels that make it fairly complex for marketers now to know which technologies to deploy and actually spend and invest limited time and limited resources in. So the way I like to look at it is let's get back to the basics of the process. How can we boil everything down to its bare elements, and then how can we take those elements and optimize them for effective content marketing process that is efficient and aligned with business goals, and also the competing needs of everybody on your team. So on your team, you may have large teams or small teams, but they're generally going to involve a number of disciplines. And whether those disciplines cross lots of people or just a few people, a lot of times you have to touch bases with each one of those disciplines. So in order to understand process, we need to really take an engineering mindset and kind of break this down a little bit more. And that's what I'm going to attempt to do in our talk today. A little bit about myself. I'm Cruce Saunders, a principal consultant at Simple A. Simple A is a content engineering focused consultancy. We do content management systems integration and customer experience management deployment. We also do training and staff augmentation in this area of content engineering. We've got hashtag content engineering if you'd like to pick up anything out of this onto Twitter, and you can find us on Twitter at Simple A Team, and I'm at Mr. Cruce. Okay, so let's take a look through our goals. We want to understand how to align these process and teams within content marketing, as I mentioned. We also want to take a look at how engineering great content experiences puts the customer first, because ultimately, as Byron elegantly said, it is about storytelling. It's about getting messages out, seeing how people respond to them, putting more out of what does work, and getting customers to engage with our brands. And the way they do that is through receiving content at the right time that touches their interests and hopefully helps to stimulate those and connect them with your brand. We also want to take a look at how organizations integrate content engineering into their process. Right now, it's not in a lot of digital marketing processes, and it's a real missing piece. And we're going to talk through what to do in order to get there. We're also going to just take a look at why it's valuable as a part of this content marketing process. So in order to get here, we should put a frame around this idea of customer experience management. I'd love to understand from everybody in the room. If we had a bigger room, I'd ask you to raise your hands and to kind of find out who has heard this term or what your experiences are with this phrase. It has taken on more and more common vernacular within the marketing world. Customer experience management is in many ways this next generation beyond content management, beyond getting our content put into a system and publishing it out through a website. Now it's really connecting customers with content experiences via multiple channels. So it's finding a way to get the content that we're creating and make sure that it gets out on every device that customers have, and sometimes in offline channels and other experiences that are more mobile, tablet and kiosk based. So orchestrating all of that content marketing requires a understanding of this concept of customer experience, what that is, and then we need to get the folks and the process involved aligned towards that. So customer experience allows us to orient the operations of a business around the needs of that customer and reach them where they are and in multiple touch points. Content marketers and content strategists and content engineers, and we'll define what that is, have different parts of this important value chain that they need to bring, and they're really at the forefront of helping to make customer experiences happen. So beyond it being a catchphrase, if we're going to facilitate customer experiences with our content, we need a framework for doing that. So content engineering is about the construct and context for our content. What will users see and how will they interact with the site? How can this be shared, related, and repurposed? Where does the content belong? So some of that's from the area of content strategy, from the disciplines of content strategy. But then also, how can we get that information connected to the users through our technical system, okay, and through our CEM or customer experience management platform. So the content engineer bridges the integration gap between content strategy, the content management system, and the customer experience technologies that are the overall landscape. So that's CRM, and sometimes that's ERP, and sometimes that's e-commerce, and other systems that interact with our customers on an ongoing basis. All of that has to be organized and aligned and integrated, and really, often the content marketer gets left behind in that. It becomes a big technical ball of yarn that is very difficult to unwind. And the content engineer kind of helps unwind that ball of yarn and get the content strategist and content marketers integrated and working together with the technologist. So the content engineer is in many ways a bridge between those two worlds, the technical and the creative. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a separate person, and we'll talk about that. It's really a role within the organization that needs to be identified, and at least somebody on your team should be deputized a content engineer as a part of the process, or at least responsible for content engineering. And so I hope to convince you of that by the end of this talk, or at least open your mind to the possibility that will be the case in the coming years. And you might look for other evidence of this in the marketplace. But that content engineer is really important for marrying content strategy, content technology, and content management. They're the technicians that help to pull together these different capabilities of the platform and your operations, people and process inside the organization, and then the vision of your executives and the vision of the senior marketing team and the vision of your content strategist. All of that vision has to be tied together and made operational. It has to be connected with the technology. You cannot have vision disconnected from the technical reality of your projects. They have to be aligned. If the technology is disconnected from the vision, what you end up with is a big mess. And the story I'm going to tell is a lot about that. Content marketing process breaks far too often, and it doesn't need to. A lot of times what starts out with a very simple vision of getting a story out to an audience can become long, difficult projects that end up becoming abandoned at worst, or published with very low standards for what that content is going to do, how it will be reused, how it will touch the customers, how it will be syndicated, and how it will be exposed to the search engines. We were talking about search engine optimization earlier. Content engineering done right opens up all kinds of new ways through schema.org and other ways of marking up content to allow Google to see the content differently than it sees content from a competitor without schema.org or without other markup in there. So if you've got semantically marked up content, which is a way of just saying extra tags, extra structure around your content that your customer experience management platform actually ads automatically if it's engineered properly, then your content's actually more competitive than the competition. It is easier for Google to consume, and it's more likely it will be digested and presented in the SERPs the way you want it to be, with much more rich search result pages where they pull apart title, headline, author, author photo, which I think they've been playing around with whether to include or not, and other kinds of elements of content that will actually present directly in the SERPs. But all of that isn't possible without engineering happening up front. And that's why we really want to make sure that we are updating our processes. So it's 2015, which is a good decade past this sort of second generation of web project management, digital marketing 2.0, which was really kind of fancier websites primarily, not a lot of mobile activity, and very little personalization. The only people doing personalization at that point were Amazon.com and a couple of other behemoths, and very little in the way of structured content. No content was really being reused. We had a lot of content blocks out there, just big chunky blocks of content that you plugged into probably a content management system that you built internally, or there was only a few major players at the time, but most of those systems were real expensive, so everybody was hacking their own system together. And projects were basically, Photoshop projects that you would do a bunch of creative in, and then kind of cut it up in HTML and push it out to the web and call it a day, and publish one time, and really not be dynamic, not tied or intelligent. It's just like publishing a magazine but online. And I hate to say it, but you wouldn't know it's not 2005 by the way that many of us are managing our digital projects today. It kind of seems like it's the same thing. We have a process that's real similar to 2005. It is time to update our process, and all the marketers leading organizations need to be on the forefront of that transformation. Deputizing content engineers, building these disciplines into the organization, and leading the charge for more intelligent content at the core of their web property. So in order to illustrate this, I'm going to tell a story about Digital Bridge and DynaCorp. And this is actually a true story. This happened. We were brought in after the fact in this situation, and kind of got a lot of the background from the folks inside that have been through the trenches on this, and anybody that's been in the industry might find some parts of this familiar. But this project is not a happy ending. It's a pretty tragic story for marketers, and it starts out happily enough. Digital Bridge is an interactive marketing company. They're and by the way, the names have been changed to protect the guilty here. But they're an interactive marketing company slash kind of interactive agency, and they've been involved in interactive since it meant static websites and Flash applications. But over the years, they grew their resources to have content strategists and interactive designers and developers with different specialties. And they had quite a few talented traffic coordinators and account executives inside the business. And they handle a lot of digital channels, so social, mobile, paid, display advertising, video, and the web. So they cover a lot of bases. They've got really smart people, excellent creatives, They've won a ton of awards. They're pretty well known as a interactive agency. They have a client that's a healthcare giant. We're going to call them DinoCorp, and they needed to grow patient volume and also improve the customer experiences that were happening across the board. Really, they were ultimately dealing with a really old website that needed to be upgraded, and so they decided to make this a big effort. Spent a bunch of money, and they had DigitalBridge build a new content strategy, a new design strategy, and they were going to basically have them do email campaigns, mobile apps, intranet, the whole thing, kind of soup to nuts, and they were starting with a very expensive customer experience management platform. So in this case, they chose Sitecore, and Sitecore is expensive. I mean, it's a really powerful platform for customer experience management, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's very expensive, and so they put in a bunch of money and a bunch of time into the license for this, and they saw this beautiful advantage of having this system that is going to do a lot of stuff. So it's ultimately, they've got tens of thousands of content IDs and thousands of visitor sessions a month. So they had this content audit that took like 3 people a month to complete. They felt like they had a good understanding of the content and a clear plan forward. And it was a pretty normal project team. They had a content strategist and an IA, they had designers, and then they had developers. The process was pretty normal. They had discovery, design, develop, test, and release. Pretty normal kind of development process. And all of those elements were tied together by talented people with good intention. They wanted to enable some personalization. They've got a lot of different this particular client had a lot of different locations, and so they needed to personalize by location and also by disease type and also by interest. They wanted to create once, publish everywhere. That's called COPE. And create once, publish everywhere sounded really good to them because they'd had a bunch of content that was sometimes duplicated in a lot of different places. So they wanted to put it all into one place and then publish from there, so they didn't have to have separate content in their mobile apps or separate content on the mobile version of their website. They wanted to reuse that content, and they also wanted to be able to have related content between sections, so disease type information related to particular locations, etc. They were hoping to also tie it into marketing automation. So basically, if a visitor comes and visits and requests an appointment, we might send a follow-up email, and then if there's no response within 3 weeks, it might prompt another follow-up email, and then if they come and revisit the site as a result of those emails, then it might send specific disease type information to them. So they wanted to automate a lot of things that were manual processes that their sales team was getting bogged down with. All of it sounded great, but the actual results was total destruction. That's a little overstated. It did ultimately launch, but not with any of the features that they really thought they were getting. So they had unstructured content blocks. So by the time we saw this thing, all the content was still in WYSIWYG chunks. because the developers hadn't been given any guidelines as to what to do with content. They were given high-level requirements, so they built what they were used to building, which was these unstructured content blocks, and they stuck them in. So none of the content could actually be reused, because when you've got unstructured content, it's all a big blob. It's just one big blob of content. So they had a title and then a blob. They had no way to relate those content items between each other. They didn't have a taxonomy or a tagging system of any kind. The development team ignored personalization requirements entirely, because the personalization requirements were written as user stories, but there was no indicator of how the content was going to match to the particular user experiences that were being described. It was just that they were just being described at a high level in these use cases, but it was abstract enough that the developers didn't know what to do with it, so they just ignored it. And then ultimately, they had a pretty poor author experience. So Sitecore is a very complicated platform. It can be made very beautiful and easy to use, but if you hack it together incorrectly, it can result in a poor author experience that nobody ends up wanting to use, and that was the case. And they had a lot of rework, a lot of back and forth and rework trying to get this right, and they ended up abandoning a lot of these things that they wanted to do. The outcome was disjointed completely. So COPE is what they did, not how their CMS worked. And really everybody was pretty frustrated by the whole thing. Basically, they felt like they had been sold a bill of goods, and all of the different folks had some really gut reactions to the situation. So you had the developers, who were all highly paid and experienced. They were overwhelmed and misunderstood. They were handed these high-level content strategy documents and some CSS files and the design. So they had a beautiful design, CSS, the IA, all of that was there, but they couldn't actually deliver on it. And then the creative team was very frustrated, and the content strategy folks as well, because they thought that the technical folks just didn't get it. And they really wished they had other ones. You know, they had spent a huge amount of mental capital up front and money for the client to put together these pretty, what they thought was well-defined, kind of strategic visions, and the technical folks didn't do it, didn't make any of it happen. And then Dynacorp felt like they'd been sold this bill of goods. You know, we spent all this money on this platform. We've gone with this highly rated interactive agency with all these awards. We've spent all this money, and ultimately we have the same thing we had before, but it's more expensive. Now we have a different design, but we still have chunky content that we can't move around, no marketing automation, really no way to execute the personalization we wanted to do, and really kind of it's not very fun to work with. And so we didn't really get into the value that we thought we were going to get. So they were kind of in a tough situation, though, because they ended up spending most of their budget on this big project. So they had very, very little left to try to recover or go back and make it better. And they liked the creative that the agency did, so they stuck with the agency. But they ended up just kind of kicking the ball forward and kind of being satisfied with something, being kind of underwhelmed with what they currently had. And it's really kind of a sad story, because they had so much potential and so much energy and so many good, talented people involved. And so we're working with them to try to turn that ball around. But the promise of content engineering is to tie some of these things together: the content strategy, all the stuff that's happening on the interface level, the responsive design, plus the functional requirements, and getting that tied in to development. So getting the creative strategy aligned with the responsive design, the functional requirements, and the developers, and getting them working together. So we'll walk through a little bit in a little bit what those are, but this might be a good time to kind of take a break and check in with everybody, see how it's going, any questions that are out there, and then we can pick back up.
Great stuff here, Cruce. Someone has a question for you. Can you give visual examples of unstructured content blocks, and also explain what relating the content means? You might go back to that slide where you sort of explain that.
Let's see. I know I've got in a
right
there,
I think. I think that's right. So unstructured, WYSIWYG unstructured blocks. So you're referring to how the developers and coders put the actual code of pages together that had. Go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So WYSIWYG is what you see is what you get. And back when CMSs were first being developed, when content management platforms were being created for the first time, essentially it was just database fields that were where you were entering content into a field, and then it would show up in the proper place on a web page. So what happened was CMSs didn't know what structure your content had. They were just coding something that would display content generically, but not all content is the same content. A lot of content has different structure. So that's very important nowadays to Google and to searchers and to republishing and to everybody. Really, anybody who wants content to be more intelligent, it has to be structured. So the difference is an unstructured content block. You go into the CMS, you go to edit a content item, and you're presented with one big chunky block of space, and you edit it like you do in Word. So you might put your title in there, you might put and then you'd put authored by, and you'd change the font, and then you'd put the subheading and a little synopsis, and all of that would be like you're editing in Microsoft Word. With just one big blank page and then you save it at the end, and then it would display exactly the way you put it in there. So if you bolded it in there, or you changed the font size, when it went to the page, it would display exactly what you put in there. And so the very first CMSs were just big blocks, essentially, where you would sort of insert block here into a web page. And what's happened over time is that's gotten more and more broken apart into elements, and more controllable by editors. So authors might have the ability to enter content but not change the formatting. So authors might, write the content in, but then the formatting is controlled at an editor level. So but a lot of times that they were still big chunky blocks. What's happened now with most of these platforms is that if you choose to, you can still do big chunky blocks, or you can create little wizards. And you can give your content authors discrete little questions to answer. So, what's the date that you want this published? When? What is the title? What is the title that should show up on a mobile website? What does the picture look like? Or upload a picture to go along with this image if you've got one, or to go along with this article. and you take them through a series. You take the author through a series of questions that ultimately ends up with a content record. What is this related to? What is this article related to? And then you provide the topics, and then it makes sure that content ends up in a format that will allow it to be used in different ways. So published differently to mobile devices than it is published to a desktop website, or republished out via RSS feeds, or republished out with schema.org tags wrapped around it that are associated with those fields. So the more you structure your content, the more intelligent it can be. And in many cases, the easier it is for writers, because you give them you can give them a workflow that allows them to add and enrich the content without having to sort of edit all the formatting and manage all of the schema.org tags and figure out how to relate it, like by plugging it in and then later going and mapping it properly to different pages. Like, you don't have to do any of that. You just give the authors one workflow so they can focus on the creative. Does that help?
I think it did a pretty good job. Someone also wanted you to bring in the word, the taxonomy, your thoughts on taxonomy, how important it is. But before you do that, I have a big picture question to ask you, Cruce. So, let's just throw ourselves back like 10 years from now, 2005, when we were all battling, coming off a recovery of the first stock market crash and the dot bomb that happened, the complexity of the web, the early stages of Google, problems spidering your site. Remember the famous question mark in your URL? Oh my gosh, evil, you're blocking the spots from seeing you. They think your pages are being created dynamically, so they're not going to give you search results, right? All the hype, all the buzz, hundreds of millions of dollars spent with technology, upgrading our sites and getting rid of the question marks and proper H1 tags and H2s and H3s and search engine optimization conferences, Gazoo, and oh my gosh, technology, the sky is falling. Cruce, aren't we out of that, man? Those days are long gone. Google has upgraded significantly. Why are we even having discussions, I would suggest, on schemes and taxonomy and tags and doing all these things for what? For what? Why are we doing it? The bots are going to recognize our content. Now, from a UX perspective, that's a different story. I get that, and I think that's where the customer's coming into play. But could you comment on that a little bit and your thoughts on really even Sitecore and some of these other technology platforms? Are they still living in the dinosaur age with antiquated technology that's having problems getting a simple article out to the web and doing it so it can be cross-referenced on other pages of the website? Like, is that still hard?
No, all good points. All good points. Yeah, we've been through the ringer with SEO and with Google. Everybody in the content business is in a dance with Google, whether they like it or not. And so we've been through the ringer. Google's put us through the ringer because they've been figuring it out, and we have to figure it out with them. So what they're trying to figure out, we hope, is about getting users, getting searchers, getting the public exactly what they're looking for. Something useful to their search query, in response to their search query. And the highest signal, most relevant, most value-added material. And it used to be, back then when we were doing all these conferences about, we're talking about meta tags a lot, stuff like that. And certainly things like query string structure and all of that was part of these algorithms. Well, what is it that the Google wants us to do to structure our content so that we will be seen as valuable? And Google has largely moved toward high signal content winning. So well formatted, beautifully presented, beautifully written, with good English and all of that. Usually those kinds of quality articles with quality markers that other people think are valuable get elevated towards the top, and less spam techniques are working. And really, if we're all honest with ourselves, most of what the search engine conferences were about was sort of manipulating the search engines. It was not, those weren't conferences about how to make beautiful, high-quality content. It was about how to get to the top of the search engine pages, right? So the content marketing revolution is really about how do we create high-quality content, and Google's responding because Google's finding high-quality content better and better and better. So if you really want to be seen by Google, create high-quality content. And absolutely, Byron, there's no reason that we should be spending too much time thinking about structure and tagging and all of that. We want our authors thinking about beautiful quality experiences for our customers, for our clients, for the people that are coming to visit us through digital touchpoints. We want them creating beautiful experiences, and we want them focused on quality. That's all true. However, Google's dream is a semantic web. They want to understand the web and all of its content, not just at a surface level. They want to understand the dimension of that content and what it means. So if you talk about a doctor on a web page, they want to know what that doctor does, the history of that doctor, where that doctor practices, what that doctor looks like. They want to know everything about the doctor that you're talking about in your article. And right now, it's getting smarter and smarter all the time. But right now, they can't infer everything just from the text of your content. They have to pull it from the schema. They have to pull it from the structure you provide. And if you mark it up properly, Google can do that in the background. But I think to address your point, it is absolutely true. We need to have content authors focused on quality and nothing else. So if we're going to do that, we need content engineers to focus on schema and petting the Google monster to make it happy, feeding it. Because if the Google monster isn't happy, the writer's content is not going to have the same kind of reach and reuse that it could have. So we want our authors to focus on quality, but we want our content engineers to focus on schema and markup and all of the stuff that happens in the background. And hopefully we want those things to be invisible to the authors and the marketers.
Got it. And is the science growing? Let me rephrase that a little bit. So from my perspective, content marketing in general is both an art and a science, right? And when content marketing was first launched as a concept, even if you look back with the introduction of the white paper, right, many years ago, it existed mostly to appeal to a non-salesy piece of collateral asset, if you will, that was launched to the world. It was fairly aligned with art, not so much science. I mean, it was what it was. It was a civil white paper, but introduced Google and optimization and SEO and engineering all this wonderful content. We saw a surge, I think you would agree, in the late 2000s and early 2000s and even, we'll call it at least mid-2000s and then into the next leap, here we are today. But I think the art part of the art and science of content marketing is really on the upsurge right now. It's the quality of the content that we're creating, the topics, the originality. Isn't that going to, in the end of the day, be what wins the war of words on the web, Cruce, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The art will win, because no matter how beautiful and how semantic the structure, how well marked up and well related the content is, ultimately people gravitate, us as humans gravitate towards quality. That's it. It's really, we gravitate towards experiences that uplift us. And our content needs to do that. Our content needs to be compelling to our listeners and our readers and our consumers, wherever they're touching it. And so ultimately quality will win. And it's the content engineering piece and all of enriching content, making it more intelligent is there to make content more accessible and reusable and more valuable. So it's not there to replace the art. In fact, if you pull out a huge arsenal and you've got tons and tons of resources and you employ every single approach that will create semantically structured, intelligent content that is well organized, but you write drivel and shallow information and it's not useful to anybody, it will still fail in a big way. But it's a power up. If you've got quality, it's the power up that will make that quality experience amplified and get to the right people and be reused within syndication and within your own marketing efforts with a lot more ease. So it's a huge advantage, but it's one of those things that when quality becomes table stakes, quality content becomes table stakes, then it starts to become necessary to get your message well structured.
And can't you bring great science from a content engineering perspective to even simple platforms like WordPress? Or isn't there great tips and advice that we'll probably be getting to in a second, but and I'm going to let you continue on with the rest of your presentation because I could ask you questions all afternoon, as you can see. But is it getting easier? We need the engineer. We need to know what's popular and what's getting shared and what's out there and what's the right direction to point the ship in, right? What's the right platform we should be publishing on, given the assets that we think we're going to publish and the data we want to reap from that. That's the engineering aspect that's winning right now. Would you agree, Cruce?
Yes, and I think whatever your platform, whether on WordPress or Drupal or Sitecore or Kentico or any of these, Episerver just bought Ectron, any of these big CMS platforms that are out there, whatever you're on, you need a content model. Mm-hmm. So your content needs to have some ultimate structure to it. So related content types. And those content types ultimately develop into a well-engineered system. Mm-hmm. And that, that's the marriage of that content strategy and with content engineering. Because we think that content engineers, or the content engineering, more importantly, not just content engineers, it's not a person, it's a discipline, needs to be integrated into the content marketing lifecycle. So this content model I was referencing is up on the screen now. The content model is something, anybody that's familiar with Sarah Wachter-Bechter's work, she's written a really interesting book that introduces these concepts. This is the entry point. That book represents sort of an entry point into into content modeling, and this is the part that no matter what platform you're on needs to be addressed, which is that in this case an article is tied to a newsletter, which is tied to a promo, which has an event, and all of those parts are then related to different elements within the content model. So date and time, and address, and illustration, or special offer, and all of those elements then get plugged into this little thing that's representing your content delivery technology. So that could be WordPress or Drupal or Sitecore or Episerver or Ectron or Kentico. It could be any of those, and then it gets a lot of intelligence happens at that point, right? This is sort of the insert content engineering magic here, because that's where it gets tied to how that content gets presented on the page, how it adapts and flows on a page, and gets personalized to different users. Personalization is part of the sort of marketing maturity model that's really far out there for most marketers. It's still it's like trying to describe New York to somebody who's just getting started on their cross-country journey from the West Coast. I mean, it's far out there. It's still, we've still got a whole country to get to before you get to there. But it is it's not possible without these kinds of structures in place ahead of time. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Carry on. These are some great slides. I think you have a few more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, CEM or customer experience management starts to happen when we're facilitating both the word side and the strategy and technology side with somebody that is responsible for organizing, or with a role, a function that is responsible for that. So in the traditional, so we see a workflow that basically has business strategy, content engineering involved, UX design, development, deployment, optimization. So we see a continuum where content engineering is a part of the workflow. And we see a situation where we had a traditional process that's up on top versus our customer experience and content engineering process below that just has a few simple changes to make. These are not huge. It's just adding taking a look at the part where we look at strategy. It's looking at strategy and what that looks like for personalization and what that looks like for device types. So modeling strategy towards the implementation side, including the implementation side of the technology side in that discussion. And then where there's a content strategy piece, add a content engineering mindset. Deputize one person to take on that mindset, that role. That could come from the development side. It could be a business analyst. It could be somebody that's a consultant. It could be somebody that's just in there to represent the content engineering pieces along with the content strategy discussion. And then in a traditional project, you normally have sort of static wireframes, but we're looking at the idea of in these content engineering kinds of discipline projects that you're really going to need to make those more rich. So instead of having static wireframes, you're going to need to have prototypes. And why is that? Because if you have a static prototype, you're saying this is what the interface will look like every time you visit it. But nowadays, really, the interface changes based on who you are and what you're looking at and on what device. And that's true with even pretty simple, like a WordPress site that's responsive. You're going to need to come up with variations of the interface, and that's best done as a prototype, not as a wireframe, not as a static wireframe. So if wireframes are still happening in Photoshop or in Adobe Illustrator, take a look at that and see if there's another way. Would this be the right time to start training people on Acture or other prototyping tools that allow us to show different versions of how interfaces work? So it's changing from a static worldview to a dynamic worldview that has different variations, and then making sure that the IAs are on board with what gets presented there. So in all of these cases, this content engineering role is sort of critical for making all of that work. It's important that adaptive content is more than just mobile. It's getting content into a format that you can share and distribute to any platform you want. So that's the content structure that allows that to happen. It means you can get your content onto platforms you control and platforms you don't. That makes that power up I'm talking about, where your content can get reused beyond your website. And Karen McGrain addressed that in her book, Content Strategy for Mobile. So content engineers are really good at structuring content assets to be orchestrated for reuse across the different media. They're, in a way, a sort of mediator between they kind of advocate for the audience's experience, but then also the technology and how it happens from the content writers. And kind of they create that, they help to create and architect those systems that are between the content authors and the content creators and the audience in all of their different places that they're consuming content and ways that they're consuming it. A great content engineer for CEM is really kind of at this intersection of strategy and technology. They've got an ability to understand management of these processes. They've got an ability to understand the customer-facing side and the internal needs, and then really kind of bring that engineering mindset to things. So every team has, usually it's got somebody like this who thinks cross-disciplinary. Those are usually really good candidates to take on the content engineering role within your teams. Content engineering results in a better author experience, long-term content reuse for personalization and structure, improved communication within the teams, and also clear configuration plans, which make developers happy. So happier developers and happier strategists, better defined configurations, and schema.org. So basically, it makes Google happy as well. And it's not just Google. There's other consumers of schema, but Google's just the big one. And then we really think that a content engineering practice should be built internally. So the best way to do that is by highlighting the role, the importance of the role, just starting to facilitate that discussion in your organization about how these competencies can be covered. Who does this? Right now it's the IA, or sometimes it's the director of development. Sometimes it's the content strategist. Right now it's all over the board. So it's a good idea to define that, highlight it, lead the discussion, introduce it, and introduce these concepts to the C-suite executives and partners, and look at your projects and see how you can streamline those projects with that function. So if you'd like, there's a lot more to discuss on this, and we're almost 10 minutes over, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I'm glad we got to cover so much. If you'd like to take a look at this book, I'd be happy to send it to you for free. It's called it's a content engineering book for multi-channel world. And if you just email me at c@simplea.com, I'll get you a copy of it. And it goes more in depth on all of this stuff we were just talking about. So glad to review that with anybody that's interested, and thank you so much for walking us through this, Byron. This has been a lot of fun.
Really fantastic. I want to get to a couple quick questions. First of all, somebody said, what's the name of Sarah's book that you mentioned?
I can't remember.
Sarah Walker-Becker? Sarah Walker?
Wachter-Bechter. Sarah Wachter-Bechter.
Bechter. Okay. Got it.
And Yeah, I have this book. I think it would be good to put that in the follow-up. I have given copies of this book to our entire team, and I have read it multiple times, and I am blanking on the name. It's a name that's pretty innocuous, but I forget what it is.
Someone had a question. When sharing on social media, would you say more traction would occur from sharing something with a big name or high attention-grabbing keywords, or something more loyal to your brand?
Let me really quickly. I found the Sarah Wachter-Bechter book. It's called Content Everywhere: Strategy and Structure for a Future-Ready Content. And Sarah's name is S-A-R-A, and then W-A-C-H-T-E-R, and then dash Bettcher, B-O-E-T-T-C-H-E-R. And it's just called Content Everywhere.
Cool.
It's actually I bought it via Kindle at first, but then it's actually a beautiful book to purchase a physical copy of. It's very
fantastic.
nicely done. Yeah.
So the question, sharing on social media, would you say more traction would occur from sharing something with a big name or high attention-grabbing keywords, or something more loyal to your brand?
I think with social media, the thing that's working for everybody right now tends to be sort of attention-grabbing titles. If you can do attention-grabbing titles plus keywords, great. That becomes a question where you kind of step back and go, what's our content strategy? What's our voice? And really take a look at that first. And then advocating for the content engineer in the discussion, after the content strategy and the voice have been determined, also take a look at, well, what kind of semantic space do we want to own? And then social should amplify that strategy. So we look at, there's a series of words. There's a series of like a little semantic world, which is a set of words that are related that we want to own. You could call it keywords, but it's more than that. It's about the relationship between those. And you put together a little kind of grid that could be used as a guideline for those kinds of social amplification messages.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Let's see, if you have a WordPress site, do you still need to install plugins like schema.org?
Yes. For WordPress and Drupal, most of these things are going to be handled with plugins. And sometimes you hack together custom solutions. Most of these platforms do not out of the box handle schema as a default, and they should, but they don't, which is another reason that it helps to have somebody who understands the reasons for semantic markup and the technology as an advocate for deploying them.
How much would you say meta descriptions influence how SEO draws visitors? Loretta wanted to know.
Can you say that again?
Here's a better way to say it. Is SEO dead? Sorry, I couldn't help myself there.
SEO is dead, but long live SEO.
Fair enough. Are you optimizing meta tags, meta descriptions, meta keywords, or are you bothering to do that anymore with A, recommendations for your customers and clients, or B, your own stuff?
So we cover the bases we recommend to clients that they cover the bases of those things, but we don't obsess about it anymore. It's really not. It's background noise. So we meta tags, for example, when I talked about creating author experiences with little wizards. So what's the title? Should this display on a mobile device? One of those is also what are the keywords, and hopefully we'll suggest them based on the content. So that the author doesn't have to come up with them themselves all of the time. But but that just gets baked into the authoring process and then published. We used to think a lot about it, and now we just kind of do it as a habit and make sure that we have good titles, good meta tags. It's sort of like just having a clean house. You just do it. It's not, you don't have to think about it. Just kind of do it along the way.
Right on. Well, it's just been great having you on today. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to show a quick link to my book right here. Let me see. Show my screen. Boom. So a couple of books for everybody to download. Feel free to have at it. You're going to get these books in a link of a follow-up along with a link to the presentation today. So thanks for tuning in. Cruce, thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Byron. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
We will perhaps block out 2 to 3 hours for you and I to continue this conversation, Cruce. It's really exciting stuff, and you're bringing so much to the table with a thorough understanding of a critical element to all of this. I just hope the engineering's job is getting easier. And one final question: do you think that the engineer can be actively involved with understanding, and distinguishing great content from not so great content? I mean, is that part of a role really for everyone on the team, but especially the engineer, wouldn't you think?
Well, the engineer ideally should be focused on the distribution, the blocking, the tackling, and the elements underneath. They should have an understanding of what creatives go through, but creatives and strategists need to lead the charge. They understand. The creatives and the strategists are going to understand how to create that magical experience that enthralls users and brings them closer to the brand. The content engineer needs to understand the importance of all of that, be able to contribute to the conversation, but their focus is on getting those beautiful strategies and messages and stories translated into technology platforms, and then to talk to developers about making it happen so that the content strategists don't have to. We want the strategists and the creatives to be free.
Mm-hmm. When do you think you need to bring in a content engineer to your company? What size of a marketing budget and/or overall online spend do you think you would need to justify the cost of either a full-time or a consultant content engineer coming into play?
That is a longer answer that will be part of our 2-hour seminar. But I will say that that there's not a one answer to that. And I also will say that the content engineer is a role that it's a discipline that there's never a bad time to start. You can start right now understanding the discipline of a content engineer, no matter what budgets you have, because it will help. If you're a content strategist, it will make you a better one.
Got it. Cruce, thanks again for being on today.
Thank you, Byron. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening in, everyone. Until next month, I hope your life's a little smarter, better, and faster, wiser. Thanks to the Cruce and this webinar. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next month.